Hey, everybody, this is John with Wheelhouse, head of revenue management education. And this is the first in our series where we're going to just take some deep dives into some Emerald Coast markets. The first market we're going to look at today is Destin, Miramar. Um, and we're just going to take a look at kind of what's going on, talk about some expectations for next year, and a little bit about strategy. So the first thing I want to show you guys is kind of an interesting little thing that we have. I'm going to hop over here to this tab, and this is a backend tool that we have, and I'm just going to show you a brief piece. So what this is showing is basically the bookings across the Destin market. It is animated, so you can see that this is kind of building up. I'm going to just put this all the way to the end for now. And what we're looking at here is March. So we're kind of looking at the spring period. And the main thing I wanted to look at is just the graph, which is showing how these bookings kind of come together. Important thing to note here is obviously, bookings are pretty slow. But once we get to about the first, so you see it starts to pick up here. We start to see some early kind of increase in pace starting in about November. And then right around here, Christmas, it starts to pick up pace. And then it really starts to accelerate pace around the 10th. So once we hit this kind of pace on the 10th, it's going to stay pretty consistent until we get to about the 24th, so right before, and then it's going to also jump up in pace again. So really, looking at this, we're kind of right at the beginning of the booking window where it's going to make its second kind of jump in pace. And it's a great time to be kind of paying attention to what's going on in the market for March and the spring. The other one I want to pull up is this is for the summer dates, so basically Memorial Day through the end of July. This one's pretty interesting as well because we see a few different jumps in pace here. First one's around Christmas again. You see the pace starts to jump up from Christmas to about through January, and it's going to be pretty steady there all the way until looks like about end of March, maybe even as far as mid-April, right? So we have the beginning of a not quite as strong pace, but a consistent increase in pace that's going to see bookings for the summer starting about now as well. This one starts about Christmas. I don't, kind of looking at this, I don't see a big change in pace. Maybe here at the end of February, we see it tilt up a little bit more. I'm just looking at the kind of angle of these graphs. And that's pretty much going to go consistently through up until we get into the last minute window, so around mid-May, and it's going to tilt up again before it kind of peters off, which makes sense because, there's going to be dates in the past here. There's going to be less to book. But I think what's interesting about beginning of January here is there's really two time frames that we need to be watching. One of them is going to be this time frame in the spring, where we really see a lot of a really large increase in pace that's going to stay pretty consistent and increase for the spring. We also see the beginning of the summer booking window, and that's going to stay pretty consistent until we get to about mid-late February, where it's going to increase again, and we really probably need to shift our focus to really be paying attention here. Okay, so let's just jump into a few data points. So I'm just going to look at Destin Miramar as a group. I did build a custom set for this, so I've got this pulled up here. That custom set's going to have a few criteria. I basically just wanted to look at kind of properties that have been performing over the last year. So I looked at stuff that was open for at least 267 days, so pretty commercialized. And then I also looked at stuff that was at least 60% more occupancy. So we're looking at properties that are going to be, have a pretty strong history of booking. And so right now what I'm doing is I am on our sets page. You can actually build something like this in our property. I have quite a lot of listings in the sets. There's 1,700 listing here. And I'm just going to glance at a few things. So let's just pull this up. We can kind of see a little bit how the fall did. Pretty high occupancy, as we know, especially through that fall break period. Thanksgiving and Christmas did all right. Much higher occupancy than everything around it. And then you can kind of see here that we're not quite seeing too much of a booking window yet, especially past May in these properties. Could be just a function of these properties, but I do think that's a little bit interesting, mainly because when we looked at last year here, um, the spring window really started as early as November, and the summer window really starts about now. So we might be a little early, but I was thinking around Christmas. We are starting to see some bookings, but no dates are really peaking up. And it's a pretty consistent downward trend. Looking at the rates, we're just going to stop by here for a second. It doesn't look too crazy. It's kind of what you would expect. I think what's interesting here is it doesn't seem like the average prices are quite guessing this year for Easter. Easter's a little later this year. It's going to be on this 20th time period. And last year it was kind of in this first week of the month. So maybe a little bit of a mismatch in the market. Not totally sure. Obviously, we're not seeing too much appear anywhere, although we do see a little bit of an increase here. Let me see if I can get a better view of this. There is a little bit of increase where these rates are landing, so maybe there's a good spring break here. But I'm curious to see if, when we looked at last year, the state range was really strong over Easter and spring break. It'll be interesting to see if those are going to even out, or if the fact that they're not on top of each other is actually going to cause some reduction. Okay, let's hop over and look at some trends. First thing I'm going to do here is go over to this graph section, and we're going to just adjust this to kind of look at the whole year. Okay, so here's what I was talking about around Easter. You had the spring break and the Easter kind of break situation looking really strong here. Obviously, April was much weaker. I would expect some of this demand to shift since Easter is going to be later. Then we need to prepare to kind of capture that in April. I also think we have to be careful about the peaks here. I'm sure we'll get high occupancy, but how much the rate is going to be able to push up if the events aren't stacked on each other. Not exactly sure what's to be expected for spring break this year, but some of my friends on the Alabama side have talked about how they expect things to not quite be as strong, that the way that the spring breaks are falling is good for them. I don't know if you guys are in the same situation, just on the other side of the border, but I do think this kind of mismatch in rate situation here is kind of interesting in the averages, in that this is still maintaining the highest date period. Easter's a little lower. We're also much flatter here in terms of rate averages. And I think kind of coming back to here, the flatness of how people are pricing spring doesn't quite match the way the occupancy actually lands in the market, right? This is much more jagged. And I think it'll be really key for people to identify what dates are booking early over the next few weeks. And then to be able to drop the other stuff to maintain higher occupancy and beat the market. The other thing I'm kind of looking at here is when we look at January last year with the snowbirds and stuff, occupancy was 40 to 50%, but we're under half of that, and it's already the first week of January. So that's a bit of a concern for me. I think that it looks like the winter might be quite a bit weaker. Now, some of you may, this may be the fact that there's, if you recall looking at the overview, there's a lot of new properties in the market, and those ones may just not have the ability to get snowbird business. But I do think something I want to look out for and talk to you guys about is snowbirds may be extremely squeezed in how much they can spend this year. Gas, food, everything else about their trips is more expensive. They may not have the money to kind of make these trips the way they've done in the past. I know a lot of people are already upset that they haven't been able to raise rates on snowbirds to kind of match inflation, but that may be exacerbated, and we may see some changes here. So, if it may just take some thinking about snowbirds. Maybe you do have to lower rate. Maybe you have to be much more selective in what properties go out. I'm not sure, but I'm interested to hear what you guys all think about that. Little piece I want to glance at is just the average nightly rate kind of situation we've got here. Sorry, asking rate situation. So what rates people are posting. And I think this is pretty interesting. Keep in mind, this is the entire market. There's a mix of bedroom counts. So don't worry too much about the specific number. I'm not comparing like single two bedrooms or anything. It's just kind of everything. But there are a few trends that we can notice here. We already talked a little bit about this kind of mismatch between spring and Easter. The rates seem to be following what happened last year instead of what dates are happening this year in the market. Also, this difference between the average and the median is really, really interesting to me. There's a very wide gap between the median and the average rate. And the average is just significantly higher. So that kind of spread is really interesting. I think what this tells us is obviously we're looking at a lot of different properties. So there's going to be some properties that are really high priced in the market. There's a lot of price differences. But I also think that means with the median being lower, there's a lot more kind of in that lower band. And then there's a lot of stuff that's significantly higher. I think for Destin, that makes sense. But we really want to pay attention here to, are people pricing higher? Occupancies have been going down in the market. Even though ADRs in general have either been going up or remaining stagnant, rental rates themselves may actually be going down a little because of the way fees are happening. And I think that what I've been hearing from the most kind of confident revenue managers in the area is there's optimism, but they're doing it by building a base of business and being more conservative about rate. If you're looking at your primary competitors in the types of properties that you sell, I think that it's really important that you kind of drive occupancy early on, undercut them a little bit, and then put yourself in a position to be able to really sell well when you get into the booking window. At some of that booking window stuff. So I pulled up just a distribution chart, so how the listings are kind of distributing in terms of their average booking windows for March 2024. And there's a few spots that I like to look at. One of them is when we hit around 80%, so 20% on the books, it's 60 days. Another one is when we hit about 80% and also 50. So 50 is at about 30, and the last 20 is going to occur about 20. So actually pretty tight band. I would expect the last 20 to occur within like 2 weeks. So that means that 30 to 60 day mark is going to be really important. I think being able to shift anything out here and remove it from this short notice, because with this last 20% of listings being booked, as far out as 20 days, that means if you're selling within 20 days, it's probably going to be a really high risk thing. So the thing I would think about is set your occupancy goals to not have to sell significant amounts of inventory. You don't want to be pacing behind when you get into this 20, 25, 20, 30 day range. Otherwise, you're going to run into a situation where, this difference between the average and the median rate is going to be a bit of a problem for you. One other quick thing I wanted to look at is I just wanted to look at a group of listings that are a little bit on the higher side. So this is the Destin Miramar 5-bedroom only. This is a little less restrictive because, we're looking at less properties, and I just wanted to get a sense of kind of what's going on here. So the bookable nights is going to be all. It doesn't matter if they have, only a few weekends available or the whole year. We're going to include them in this set. And I've really only filtered out the bottom 20% occupancy. So if you were less than 20% occupancy, I filtered you out. But otherwise, we're kind of including those in the set. So let's take a look. Okay. So seeing similar trend, we're a little early in the booking window. If you recall looking at these, those booking windows should really be starting now. I would expect to see a little bit more than we currently see. So that's a little bit of a concern for me. But we do start to see some early booking. What's interesting in this larger set is we're still not seeing booking too much stick out for Easter. But this kind of March period is looking a little different than it did when we were looking at the market as a whole. When we were looking at the market as a whole, the end of March, which last year we had end of March, spring break, and Easter, that was actually the highest kind of booked time period in advance this year. This year in the larger properties, it's March 8th through the 13th, 14th. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know if that, what that aligns with, but that seems to be the one that is popping out a little before all the others so far. Looking at our occupancies, I'm going to look at this a different way. This is the easier way to look at it, which just shows the year over year on top of each other. See a similar kind of concern here that I had with the snowbird situation, although in these big properties, it's going to be less of a big deal. You can tell, the overall occupancy here for the winter is already just much lower. People aren't booking these kind of properties for the snowbirds. We do seem to be pacing okay in the very short term. It's actually pacing a little better, and then that falls off once we kind of hit third week of January. But we'll see if that kind of picks up, because if when we come back here, we are selling a little bit, about 23. Let's see, how many per week? 14 per week. 14 per week is really only a percent or two, so it's really not enough to get where we're going to go. I think this is something that we've seen. The snowbird situation is just not materialized the way it has in the winter. Looks like it's going to potentially be pretty weak in the market. That being said, the kind of early booking when we looked at DARM, which if you saw the overview, we talked about some of the DARM data overall, seeing kind of higher occupancies. That's looking okay here, right? We're starting to see some of these dates materialize. Definitely seeing it materialize more on specific dates. I think if you have 4, 5, or larger bedroom properties in your portfolio, they're going to be really important as your bellwether, because you really need to know what dates are going to sell well for the spring, especially for your properties that you're going to sell more on a production level, those 3 bedrooms, those 2 bedrooms. And if you're also looking at other, if you're in a market nearby Destin, watching their really high-end properties, what dates start to fill up first, is going to be really helpful, because as you can see last year, there's obviously these huge spikes on specific dates. We expect these to be a little different. Obviously, Easter is much further out, maybe a little weaker, but there's also dates that had extremely low occupancy. And if we can use these high-end properties to identify what properties or what dates are going to sell well, we might be able to drive occupancy on these other dates by adjusting our pricing before that, ideally before that 60-day window, but definitely before that 30-day window, and has to be before that kind of 20-day drop off. Awesome. So there's a few tidbits for you. Next, we're going to do another market on the Emerald Coast. And then hopefully as we get a little deeper into the window, we'll follow up with you guys on this to see how things have been actualizing. Thank you.